Welcome back to The Collaborative, the podcast for young professionals in Michigan's credit union world who are out here trying to connect, grow, and basically take over the cooperative finance universe, one episode at a time. As always, we're powered by Fuel Michigan because even podcasts need a hype squad. Whether you're tuning in on your commute, at your desk pretending to look very productive, or with a cup of coffee, that may or may not be your second or your third. I'm just really glad you're here. I'm your host, Camille, and today I'm excited to sit down with Michael Wolsten, a culture strategist, executive consultant, author, and passionate advocate for transformational leadership. Michael's credit union journey began during his college years when he discovered an industry built on people helping people and found a career path that aligned with his values. Driven by a passion for helping leaders and organizations reach their full potential, he launched his own consulting practice, where he now works with executives and teams to create meaningful, lasting impact. Not only that, but he wrote the book Catalyst, a work focused on inspiring growth, leadership, and positive transformation. In this conversation, we'll explore Michael's journey from credit union professional to entrepreneur, discuss the importance of culture in today's workplace, and unpack what it means to be a catalyst for change, both in our organizations and in ourselves. So grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and join us as we learn on this episode of The Collaborative. All right. Well, welcome, Michael, to The Collaborative. Thank you for reaching out and joining me.
Absolutely.
I met you last year at ACE, and to be honest, I don't know much about you. I do know your book, Catalyst, which I have my bookmarks on. I have read through it. Love it. Talk to me about your journey into the credit union space and deciding to write a book before we dive into the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a little bit of the short version. When I was in college, I was first introduced to a credit union. At that time, actually, there was a bankruptcy that showed up on my credit report. And at that time, I was looking to get married and had that pop up and we were trying to get a car loan and I was freaked out because I've never gone bankrupt and my parents had and I didn't know that. And so I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything about credit or money or anything financially. I was at a bank and my fiance, soon to be wife at the time, said you should go into a credit union. So I will never forget walking into Selco Credit Union in Eugene, Oregon, and Nancy helped me out when I was feeling pretty stressed and pretty overwhelmed and oh my gosh, I have this black market. It's never going to be taken care of. She helped me dispute it. She helped me go through the whole process. She helped me build my credit, which I didn't even know that was a thing, and just really helped me out. And so ever since then, I've really felt indebted to credit unions because I had that personal experience of going from feeling really in just a lot of terror a little bit to wow, I have somebody who's my advocate who really cares for me. And my bank at the time probably really could have cared less. And so that really kind of started my credit union journey. And fast forward, I went to college and worked at Starbucks for a number of years and really loved kind of that sales and service side. But really that impression of credit unions really stuck with me. And so when I moved a number of years later to Boise, Idaho, my mother-in-law introduced me to a credit union, Idaho Central Credit Union. She said, "This is where you got to bank. This is what you got to do. You're got to have this experience here." It was an amazing experience, and I just said, I would love to learn how to help people like Nancy helped me. That would be so cool to be able to kind of pay it forward, but then also kind of build on that. And so, through that time frame, I got to start at Idaho Central Credit Union. Was with them for 14 years. Started as a branch manager, moved into vice president. Traveled all across the state, built a lot of teams. I just learned so much about the credit union movement and became really passionate about it and just loved it and had an amazing time. And so it was probably 6 years ago that my wife said, and she's much smarter than me. And sometimes our spouses and significant others are way, they can see things that we can't see.
Yeah.
And she said, "Hey, what if you did what you've been doing?" Because I work a lot in the space of helping build out teams and culture and building out growth plans and all that, and had done that all across the state. And she's like, "What if you did that for other credit unions?" And I was like, "That's a really bad idea. That sounds really scary. I've never stepped out on my own. I've always been W-2. I don't know what that looks like, but it just kind of kept coming back and kind of gnawing on me a little bit. And had 3 teenage boys at the time. And I was like, you know what? If I don't do it now, it's probably just not going to happen. And so stepped out and started my own consulting practice about 5 years ago. And it's been fantastic. And so we've been able to build out a lot of the systems that are in Catalyst. It's really pulled from all of the history that I just shared with you, my time at Starbucks and at Idaho Central, but really diving into what works really well at credit unions and what doesn't. and what are some of the proven like frameworks that really make a big difference? Because to me, I'm just really passionate about credit unions. I'm passionate about what they do, but I want them to thrive and grow. Especially small to medium sized ones. Like I want that to be something that is like an enduring legacy for
Yeah.
credit unions to be known for. And so that's a lot of the work and kind of why I do a little bit of what I do.
What inspired you to huh? What inspired you to write the book? Just
Yeah,
getting the
yeah,
word out of there, or it's a
yeah.
really good book. I am terrible with nonfiction books, except for when it comes to leadership and teamwork. Maybe because Harbor Light, we've done book clubs where our CEO has picked a leadership book and then we all read it. And so I found it extremely interesting. So
Thank you.
what was
Yeah.
your
I kind of,
motivation?
yeah, the great question. I kind of call it my love letter to my clients. I was building all these different things and I had all these different frameworks and I was like, gosh, it'd be really cool to have one spot where people could use it as like a really quick reference. So I'm with you, Camille, where I'm just like, okay, if it's a story, I love it and I can kind of get into it. But if it's nonfiction, sometimes it's kind of like, oh, this is going to be kind of dry. I've tried to make it as practical and really as simple as possible because I know leaders are busy and they've got a lot going on. So for me, I just wanted to kind of like a really nice how-to guide to work through the things that come up for all leaders all the time, right? It's like, how do you find really great people? How do you really coach through difficult situations? And so I made it kind of topical that way. And then, went through what I call the big five, where I go through and focus on, okay, how do you focus on growth? How do you focus on the culture side? How do you focus on service? And really tried to kind of pulled in all the different frameworks that have
Mhm.
just really been successful. And, if you're anything like me, it's kind of like I can learn something, I can read something, I can hear something, but it's really nice to have a resource to go back to. It's really nice. Like I'm kind of a person where I'm jotting down notes and I know you and I were talking a little bit before the session as well. You're kind of a note taker too. Like I like something I can actually like write in and be like, okay, this is, a little note to myself or something to remember and highlight as well.
Yeah, I do that. I have notes upon notes from certifications that I've done that I still access. So I think that's a good reason to put the book together and be like, here's something for you to have. And I love that you said it's a love letter to your clients. Like it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
I love
yeah.
that.
Because they're amazing, and honestly, the credit union movement to me is an amazing movement, and it deserves to be invested in. And I think leaders deserve to be invested in, and that's another reason I wrote it. Is because I personally believe that, especially credit union leaders, sometimes serve more than they kind of receive, and I think sometimes that's to a fault. If I'm just being real honest, I kind of fell into that trap too. So I'm like, gosh, I want to give something to them that they can kind of like use and kind of pull more from that reservoir, right? Great leaders read. And you mentioned that, as far as book clubs and kind of different things. I'm like, gosh, if this is one more resource and toolkit that they can pull from, then I'm excited to be able to do that.
That's awesome. I will admit, like, it took me a while just to pick it up. You gave it to me last year because I was so sad. I was like, I'm going to miss your speech. And then you gave it to me, which was amazing. Took me a while to pick it up because life has been a little crazy the last year, but I did. And you talk about so many interesting things in it. And you talk about making the shift in it from doer to developer and what makes that shift so hard? What does a leader, or really anybody, not even just a leader? I'm the kind of person I believe in. You don't have to be in the C-suite to be a leader.
Absolutely.
But what does a leader have to do, have to let go of to just make it go from doer to developer? And what's the
Yeah.
difference?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this is a kind of a trap that a lot of leaders fall into, and I totally agree with you. I think we're all leaders in just different forms and shapes, and so whether you have a title or you don't have a title, this doesn't really matter. The doing is something that we kind of get known for, right? And I kind of go back to myself where it's like, oh my gosh, if I do a really great job at helping members, right? So then it's easy for that to stay something that I do or hold on to certain reports or hold on to certain tasks. And so as a leader, I think one of the big things is saying, hey, that's great. This is kind of what helped me get to maybe that next position or my growth or maybe what I'm known for. But what's my ultimate goal? And really our ultimate goal, I think, in this life is to help replicate the really good portions of us, right? I mean, that's why we have, some people have children. That's why like, you kind of develop and kind of mentor people and invest in others is like, okay, cool. I've mastered that. Is that just for me to hold on to? Or is that for me to help somebody else? And so we go through that process and kind of, teach people that piece of like shifting the mindset, but also shifting, hey, what does that look like for delegation? How can it feel really natural? And help you continue to grow as well, because that's one area that can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, right? Is just holding on to certain things and focus on the doing and the developing piece to me is just It helps people, especially as they're looking to continue to grow in their roles, right? And that's finding partners that you can work with. This using kind of like the resources that you have. It's really dependent on each position. But there are some principles in the book that really help kind of highlight that too.
There really are. I loved it. The other part too, and another question is like, what do you want to, like, what would you tell a leader who wants to make an impact before they even have like the official title? Because like we said, leaders, you don't have to have the title. And a lot of the people or the main focus, the main audience of this podcast are mid-level, they're emerging leaders, they're young professionals. They don't have the authority necessarily, but how can they make an impact without that quote unquote leader title?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, there's two things that come to mind, and this kind of is what I shared at the beginning of the book as far as a little bit of my story. I kind of had this idea, and there's kind of a popular mantra, fake it till you make it. Well, that was a really bad advice for me, because I took that as I can't ask for help and that I kind of have to pretend that everything's okay when it actually wasn't. And so through some pretty big failures that I kind of talk about a little bit in the book, and losing great people and just really struggling in my first leadership role in the credit union, I learned, hey, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be transparent. It's okay to really dive into like resources and have mentorship. I think sometimes younger leaders or emerging leaders or people who are kind of like moving into that role where they're kind of more focused on, hey, I've got my individual performance and now I've got a team, feel like they have to prove themselves. And that's totally natural. But there's also a real place for kind of that transparency and being able to be like, okay, I need some help figuring this out. Or, hey, who's that person that I see within the organization or even another organization, another credit union that I really admire and I really look up to, and asking for that advice, asking for that mentorship, asking for that help. That's why I love, supporting leaders in the work that I do, working at that executive level, because even if you're in the C-suite, like you need help, right? That's kind of my perspective is, hey, we don't see everything. We're all on a journey. I'm on a learning journey. And so I just think that's super important. And then, just focusing on performance instead of perception. I think sometimes it's kind of like how was this said in a meeting, or how did this look? At the end of the day, the best organizations and the one you want to stay with and work with long term, and obviously, just kind of like the opportunities that'll come. It's dependent on how did you perform? What did you do? What were your relationships like? All those things matter the most. And so I have that focus of, hey, bloom where you're planted. Stay really humble and hungry, and stay focused on what's most important, and then adding in a lot of the leadership pieces and a lot of that development along the way can make a huge difference too.
Yeah, perception is a very valuable thing to have, but when you're performing and you're performing well, I feel like that will completely trump it almost every single time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What you do will show, and it's one thing to say something, but to also do it and show it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Talking back, you've coached hundreds of leaders because you started out doing it, and then you've gone across and you've done it all across credit unions and businesses, and you coach to the 4 leadership strength areas. How does someone lead from their strengths without using their blind spots as an excuse? Because there's one thing about humans sometimes is that we really love excuses.
Yeah. Same here, right? I kind of had my own things and, would kind of like utilize that. Or, sometimes it's not even like using it as an excuse. Sometimes the other thing is like, oh my gosh, I just need to really focus on, my weaknesses and try to get, just a little bit better or get better in this area and become well-rounded. And what I find for myself and for a lot of leaders is kind of in those 4 different area types. And, I use a lot with Clifton Strengths. I'm a really big fan of that and the methodology, because I just love the idea of saying, hey, are there things that I'm not as naturally great at? Absolutely. Like for me personally, if you put me in front of spreadsheets all day and said, Michael, we need you to be in the accounting department. We need you to run spreadsheets and like do all the financials and all that kind of stuff. Like I can do some with numbers, and I kind of like numbers in certain ways. There's no way that I would do well with that. It's just not who I am. I love being with people. I love kind of like the more the outward piece and teaching and focusing on, some of the leadership, pieces. Like that's just a bigger deal for me. And so it's okay that I'm not in love with the kind of the spreadsheets piece, but I want to make sure that I'm leveraging like what I can with that. And so we go through the book in that of saying, hey, who in your organization is strong in those areas? How can you find some of those fit partners, especially if they are kind of at that peer level? It's really powerful. I had a coworker one time who we were at the same level in the organization. And we just had a really deep conversation on what we loved, what we were strong in, what we weren't strong in. And she said, Michael, I hate the getting up in front of people stuff. I hate like we're training people, we're teaching people, we're doing all this stuff. And she was, at a higher, manager level. She did it, but it just wasn't what she loved. And she's like, hey, as we're working together, if you'll do that kind of stuff, I'll do the background stuff. Like I love putting the numbers together and putting the promotions together and figuring out all the rules and thinking through stuff and, like being strategic in these ways. And so, we both still did things that we didn't necessarily always love, but we got to partner together and do more of what we loved. And I think that's really important within organizations, within teams, again, whether you're in a leadership position or not, it's just kind of going through that. And so if your organization does assessments, awesome. If they don't, that's something I can obviously, I help support with lots of organizations, but even just observationally, right? Like what are the things that I love to do? I'm naturally good at. The team's already always telling me that I'm great at. And what are some things I don't love as much? And then just seeing if there's some partnerships there where you can kind of like reallocate a little bit, or just make sure that there's kind of like some good support on. I'm also somebody who is really forward moving. So I need somebody to help me to proofread sometimes, to slow down a little bit and look over the presentation, right? To help me with some of that. That's okay. I know that I have that and I need that. So who are the people kind of like that you have, in whatever your role you're in to kind of help who are stronger in some of those areas?
Yeah.
Is a big piece as well.
I think very often I'm taking things to our CEO and saying, hey, can you proofread this? Because he is top notch at finding all of the errors that I will find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm like,
very
I can
detailed.
run it through spell check 5 times and it still doesn't.
Right.
Things
Or have
just
something off just a little bit. Yeah, absolutely.
That's solid. What do the best leaders you've worked with consistently do that you don't see average leaders doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this goes back to one of the models that I talk about in the book. And I would say this is true for, people who are maybe looking like in that individual contributor role, for people who are looking to grow as a leader or in that leadership position, but it's that 3 C's. So it's their, because I kind of worked backwards. I was thinking through, okay, who's all the leaders that I've worked with? What are some of the pieces that I see consistently? And I kind of, got to build out this model. I wish I could say that I figured this out years ago, but it's probably been, maybe 4 years ago that I had this built out of the 3 C's of committed, capable, and coachable. So if people who are committed to their work, to the organization, if they're capable of what they're doing, and that doesn't mean just, the current role that they're in, but it's kind of like in sports, they say, hey, somebody who's coming out of high school or college, has this upside. They've got the talent. It's kind of raw. They need to be coached a little bit better or a little bit more deeper in certain areas, right? And so there's kind of that latent talent that's there that just needs to be kind of grown a bit. And then coachable. So, and this is a really big one, and I'm a firm believer of this. I look at every organization and every leader that's successful from the top down. If the CEO and the C-suite and mid-level managers, all that are coachable. I'm a big proponent of that. Me personally, I have a coach. I believe in it. Nobody's arrived ever in leadership. Then you have room to work with, right? But if somebody's kind of in I've got to figure it out, or I've been doing this for X amount of years, or I think things are going pretty good, I don't really think I need to do a whole lot, then it always is going to cause stagnation. And I always kind of say you're either growing or dying, right? There's no real in between. Sure. It's just kind of reality of kind of how we are as humans. And so for me, kind of focusing on those 3 C's, and I have a whole framework, within the book, and ask a lot of questions around it of like, how can you assess where you're at in those 3 areas? But the best leaders, and I would say the best team members, hit all 3, and they do that consistently. Or if they're low in a certain area and they're just like, gosh, yeah, I am a little bit lower in my commitment. I think things are a little bit off here. I don't feel that same like drive and that same hunger for what I was doing. Or gosh, I do feel like I haven't really been open to some feedback and like some new approaches. I'm kind of been a little bit more just like stuck in what I've been doing, right? I need to break out of the mold a little bit. I need to have some new tools in the toolbox. Then, that can really make a huge shift for leaders and make some big, changes happen right away.
Yeah. Culture. It goes back to culture, essentially, I feel like.
Yeah.
And you touched earlier mentioning it in the big 5, which is culture, service, growth, finances, and systems. And it's like the food pyramid is what I always think of.
Yeah.
Culture is at the bottom being the biggest. What about culture? Why is it at the bottom? What is so important about culture?
Yeah, it's such a big one. I think it's Peter Drucker who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I really like that quote because the truth is, and I work with credit unions all across the country. A lot of times we'll come in and we'll have kind of like, hey, here's the plan that we have. Here's something that we've been working on, and they've got a couple goals, and nothing wrong with that with the strategic plan. But what I hear a lot of times is when the culture isn't locked in, it's kind of like, well, we've got these goals, but nobody really cares about. Nobody really knows how we're gonna get there. Nobody like really feels like they're super invested in it. Or there's maybe one or two people who are driving a lot of that, but there isn't that real like drive to see kind of how their daily behaviors drive that strategy. And so for me, culture is so big because it is something that feels kind of like intangible or kind of squishy a little bit, but it is something where you could walk into, let's say, a restaurant, right? Or walk into a credit union and you can feel the atmosphere. Like you can feel the atmosphere in a branch, right? You can feel an atmosphere. I'll back on banks for a second. I've walked in lots of banks and it's just like, oh my gosh, this is super cold. These people do not want me to be here. I'm going to get in and out really quickly compared to a lot of credit unions who, not all of them are perfect, but a lot of them are a little bit more warm, more friendly. Hey, we're going to get to know you, ask you some questions, right? There's just that different environment and atmosphere, and that allows for growth. That allows for sustainable growth. And so to me, the culture is kind of, you have to have it. We do a pulse survey as part of our process, and I kind of touch on that a little bit, where we kind of take a snapshot and say, okay, where are things at? Because no culture is perfect. There's always room for improvement with any team, right? Because we're humans. And so it's just an anonymous survey that I offer to folks, and it does a great job of saying, okay, here's the baseline. Here's where you're at. Here's where things are really strong. Here's some improvement areas. And then we take that snapshot again in 6 months and see what the improvements are after implementing a lot of the frameworks from the book and the work that I get to do. And it just makes such a huge difference because, culture's that driver. It drives everything else. And when it's on, I'm sure you can probably think of that too, maybe depending on your work experience or maybe other people's work experience. I've worked in some great cultures. I've worked in some not great cultures.
Yeah.
And my motivation, my engagement, and the level and the quality of my work really is dependent on that too, right? So everything kind of flows from that for sure.
I mean, like, quality of work is totally different when you're in a different culture.
Yeah.
I've worked in some places where I didn't get pulled into an office unless I was tired or I was in trouble. And I think the first time, it was like my second week at Harbor Light, I got pulled into the office by our now COO, but she was like my head teller at the time. And she's like, I don't know, I was like, oh my God, what did I do? And she said, I just want to see how you do, see how you're liking it. And I was just like,
Yeah.
Like,
I'm not in trouble.
y'all actually care how I'm doing on the second week? That's new. It is. Culture is, it can be tricky, right? Because especially when you have a culture that is toxic and trying to change it. What are some challenges that you've gone through when coming into these places and trying to help them improve culture and change it? And what are those challenges? What do they look like?
Right. And this is true for any organization. So this is a hard one because it's really dependent on each situation. Obviously, culture starts at the top, right? Kind of what's allowed, what's not allowed. What is the CEO and the C-suite doing, in regards to some of those things. And so I think, that's a big piece for me is trying to provide as much information as I can, as much support as we can to help change and shift some of those things if it is more toxic, because, that they're going to have the biggest impact in being able to change some of that and make a difference. But let's say, you're not on the C-suite, you're on the front line, or you're, in a role in the organization, or, you're emerging leader, whatever it might be. I think two things come to mind is number one, really focusing on how do I want to treat people, consistently? Like what do I want to make sure that I'm focused on? Because sometimes you can get fixated and kind of pulled into the what I call the drama triangle, right? So it's kind of like, I don't know if you're kind of familiar with that. Yeah, but it's kind of like hero, victim, villain. And it's kind of like, oh, am I the hero of the situation? Am I more of a victim? And I'm kind of like getting pulled into some of this, am I the bad guy in it? Those types of things. And so kind of that framework's a really good one to reference when you're kind of dealing with some toxic behaviors, so that you're not getting pulled into conversations that you shouldn't be, or, you also know kind of how to approach it. But for me, the big thing is, hey, I want to be the most positive force that I can be while still holding my boundaries. Right. And so it's okay to say things like, hey, this doesn't really work for me. Or, hey, when you're, mentioning this, or when this is happening, gosh, I don't feel like this is really like matching the goal for the mission of the organization. Right. Or what we're trying to accomplish. Right. There's lots of different ways to say that. But if it gets really egregious and somebody needs to address things, I think that's one piece that I've seen that shifts things the fastest is having leaders and frontline folks and just really anybody in the organization holding to the things that they always want to see, like that things that are true, that really move the organization forward, and some things they just never want to see, right? They don't want to see disrespectful behavior. They don't want to see, infighting. They don't want to see all this other stuff. And of course, working with leaders and HR and all that stuff is really important. But I think sometimes just kind of seeing it and addressing it and helping people kind of like know, like, oh, I'm going down like not a great path. I probably need to shift a little bit. Can make such a big difference really quickly. And I think really acknowledging that every team member has the power to either positively or negatively influence culture. Again, there's no like middle ground. It's either you're providing some really good things, or you're probably taking some things away, right? And so how are we doing that to really make a big difference?
That's kind of like when you say culture is what you say, isn't what you say, it's what you tolerate. And that's
Right.
one way of doing it. And I think people who have inherited that toxic culture, I mean, that's got to be rough. Luckily, I have not been in that leadership role to take that on, but I have witnessed it in
Mhm.
previous experiences. And
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
rough.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's only so much you can change. So I never want to put that on people of like, oh, you got to change the whole organization, or you got to do this and that. I mean, really, at the end of the day, I think each person's responsible for what they're responsible for. But one piece that really helps with this, and this is great for leaders, and I think just in general, it's in the book as well, but it's called Honoring the Absent. So I'm going to make sure, like, and I think this is a commitment that everybody can make, and it can be a big shift, is I'm going to make sure that when people are in the room, I'm talking about them the same way as if they weren't in the room, right? So that kind of touches on gossip, but also kind of like touches on like, I want to be really respectful about how we talk about members. Would I talk about this member the same way if they were standing right here in the lobby? Would I talk about this team member the same way if they were right here next to me, right? And I think what that does is it says, hey, if there is an issue and we need to talk to somebody, let's talk to them about it, right? Let's like handle conflict. Let's have a hard conversation, whatever it needs to be, instead of it kind of going back channels. And that can cause a lot of toxicity too.
Yeah.
Just by kind of like, hey, let's stop this flow and then focus on if it is actionable. If I need to, bounce something off of somebody, there's a whole different like way of doing it, and can really be productive too. So
What about advice for hard conversations? Because
yeah,
especially in culture, that can be, I'm very much the person personally where I don't like having the conversation. I'm going to be sick to my stomach beforehand. I'm going to be like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. And then I'm going to do the conversation. But advice for people who hate conflict,
yeah,
do you have any of that? Because I know there's a
yeah,
lot of people that I know
yeah.
that just don't want to
It's
have
a
the conversation.
it's a pretty small percentage of people who are like, Michael, I love conflict. I just love arguing with people. Like there are some people who are a little bit more combative, I guess, or like debate. But yeah, and I think it's like skydiving, public speaking, and like having hard conversations are like the three things that people typically have the most heartburn over, have the most anxiety over, and
Yeah.
so. Yeah. So I was in a similar boat where I was just like, oh my gosh, how do I have this conversation? How do I go through it? So in the book, I have a framework called the CPR method. And I called it that. I have a lot of acronyms for things because it helps me remember stuff. But the
You are
CPR
such a
method stands
credit
for
union
connect.
person.
What's that?
You're such a credit union person with all of
I'm
our
totally a credit
acronyms.
union person. Yeah. You got to have acronyms for everything, right?
Yes.
But yeah, and the reason I called it CPR is because it always feels like a critical situation, right? Whether it's like the thing itself is big, or like you just mentioned, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to have this conversation. It's tomorrow morning. I'm going to think about it tonight. Like, how do I go through this? And so it's connect, position, and reset. And the reason I had this framework, that's been so helpful for me and so many leaders is it gives you time to kind of think through it and structure it a bit. And so I'm not a big fan of like, hey, I want to write everything out and read from a script. I'm not saying that. But a lot of times when we think through how we want the conversation to go, it can really make a huge difference compared to what can happen a lot of times, which is, my gosh, what if they say this and then I got to say that? Or what if they react this way? Like it's all, not always, but sometimes it's kind of like all the worst case scenarios of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Instead of like, I have an opportunity to give this person feedback. And so how am I going to do that in a really clear way? How am I going to make sure that I'm asking some really good questions ahead of time, or at the beginning of the conversation, because I don't want to assume that I have it all figured out. I don't know about you, but I've had conversations that I've stepped into and thought that I had all the information I needed, and then I didn't. And I had made some assumptions, and I was like, okay, well, that's embarrassing, or oh, I'm so sorry, I just didn't know. And so making sure I'm kind of coming from a place of curiosity and I want to dig a little bit deeper on that connect piece. And then position is really helping the person see like how it's affecting things, right? So if it is something that's negative, it could be in a coaching conversation. It could just be with a peer. Hey, this is something that I've noticed. I want to bring it to your attention, and here's how it's kind of impacting a couple different things, right? Or here's kind of like the feedback that I've gotten from it, or here's how it's kind of like impacting what's happening here, on these different areas. So it's kind of touching on, hey, is it impacting members a certain way? Is it impacting the team a certain way? Is it impacting you a certain way? And then the reset is really finding common ground. If it's a coaching conversation, it's great to help someone make a commitment to do something different, to change one behavior, to change one thing that could help make a difference in it. That is a big focus. And sometimes that's missed in hard conversations. It's more like, hey, you did this thing. There's no real questions. Don't do it anymore. You do a great job here if we're kind of going on the positive side, or, hey, you can't make mistakes like this and we need to move this forward. And it's just kind of left there instead of that really important portion, which is what's the one behavior that's going to change so that either this doesn't happen again or that really helps support that person to make a difference. And that can tie into really small things like, being on time and dress code and how they're working on projects, up to some bigger things too. And so going through those steps, going through it specifically, writing it out, having that conversation, and then being able to, go through that with confidence is a huge game changer. And it's made a huge difference for me personally, but for all the leaders that I've walked through with it as well, it's made a big difference too.
I think a big thing too is going into those conversations and them knowing that you're coming from a place of respect. You're not trying to tear them down. You're not trying to talk about them or gossip or be mean. I'm internal controls and the BSA person. I am the person who finds all the mistakes and is
So you got a lot of those.
what you're doing wrong.
Yep.
I say that like I feel like I am the snitch of the credit union. But one of the things that I always say is when anybody is starting to open new accounts, I send them this really long email of everything, and at the bottom I'm just like, I just want you to know when I'm telling you these things, I'm not trying to be mean. I want what's best for you. I've made all of these mistakes myself, and you can ask anybody on our leadership team because I promise you, I've cried in every single one of their offices some point in the last 8 years.
Right.
And it's definitely what I've noticed is there's a difference between saying and doing and
absolutely
letting them know that you're coming from respect. And I think that's another thing with hard conversations as well, is sometimes people don't think that you are respectful, and you to remember.
And it's so true. And I think, sometimes depending on the situation, that's because, we can have really high emotions. Like maybe something's impacted us personally. Maybe we're frustrated about something. Maybe we're like, oh my gosh, I've said this, 3 times already. Like making sure that, to your point, is more focused on the message and like the impact for that person, and that we really care about them and we want to coach them or we want to help them kind of move past something or improve something. I think you're totally right on with that for sure.
Yeah, I'm an emotional person, and there have been times where I get an email or something, and I'm like, I can't respond to this right now. I can't go talk to you about this because I'm going to get in trouble.
Yes, that's so, I'm the same way. Well, in the book, I know this is another, but the 24-hour rule is a big one for me. So it's kind of that window of like, hey, you want to address something ideally within 24 hours now. Like, maybe there's like a 3-day weekend or something like that and you need to sit on something. But for the most part, the idea is like, hey, I want to do it within 24 hours, but I also want to give myself time so that if I'm feeling a little bit hot on something, I'm feeling, like some sort of emotions around something, whatever, like giving ourselves time just to kind of process that and to think about it. I'm a big outside person, so I love it could be 10 degrees outside. I'm like, all right, at least I'm going to take a walk outside for a minute, collect my thoughts, kind of get into good space, write it out, kind of think through what I want to say. And then determine like what's the best way to do it. Because sometimes, like to your point, it's like, I get an email and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to craft something back and shoot it off. And I do that right away within 5 minutes and I'm frustrated about it. And then I'm like, oh, shoot, just do, like that wasn't great. So giving ourselves kind of the tools, like you said, to help with that makes a big difference.
Take a walk, go call your friend and scream about it or do something. But definitely. And I like the 24. I'm a big fan of the 24-hour rule. My supervisor has taught me that. And I'm like, that's a good one. I also going back to like using your tools and asking for help. When I've had to have tough conversations in person or even emails, I've gone to my supervisor or other people and been like more in leadership who are or side. I'm like, how can I approach this? With respect and also like get my point across that this is not okay.
Yeah. That's really, yeah, it's so important. And, even the medium too, right? Like, so maybe we get an email on something, but it really deserves a phone call or in person or, video or something like that. And I think sometimes, if we're having a hard time with difficult conversations, we can kind of go more towards email. And I'm not, I'm a fan of documenting maybe after the fact, just to confirm like, hey, we had this conversation, just to confirm here's where we're at. But I think it's so hard to get tone and to really kind of get that heart behind it when it is a harder conversation. And it's just so much better to do, either face, and it's harder, I get it, but like being able to do face to face or doing a phone call or just something. And like you said, really focusing on, hey, I'm saying this for your benefit, or I'm saying this for a member's benefit. I care a lot about you, and I want to be able to give you some feedback, right? And then just being real direct on it too. I think all those things kind of weaved in together make a big difference.
Yeah. I also make it a point to go in at least once a week and know the people, and I'm not just
Yeah.
sitting here telling you you're wrong. You
Yeah.
also see me hanging out behind the teller line because I need a break. I
Yeah.
found it. I helped balance a vault the other day because I was like,
Nice.
I need a break.
Yeah.
Because
That's awesome.
we're
Mhm.
all human, and I think that's a big one to remember when we come to culture and work, and we're all going to make mistakes and treat people with respect.
Mhm.
The one other thing I wanted to talk about was the success loop that you talked about, because I thought that was a really interesting one of being the motivation, track, and celebrate. And how did you study or come up with that? And why do you think all of these things are so important?
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, I kind of worked backwards. Again, I wish I could say that I had this all figured out the first time. I think failure is a really great teacher, and also kind of like,
Yeah.
well, why did that work this time and this didn't? So
Yeah.
for a lot of the frameworks that I've built out, it's just been over, my experience, but then also working with lots of leaders and pulling a lot of really great things in together. And so the success loop was one of them, where I was looking at the promotions, I was looking at the rollouts that we did, I was looking at all these different things, and I was like, why does some of this work and why does some of it doesn't? And what's the sequence here? So just to break it down really quickly, yeah, the success loop, and it could be something as small as we want to do a little, branch competition, and we want to focus on, growing our checking accounts or, financial conversations, something like that. It could be something really as big as like, oh my gosh, we're rolling out a whole brand new core system, right? So it could be something big, something small, but really when it comes down to it, there's three keys. One is motivation. So what is the motivation for why we're doing what we're doing? Not just at an organizational level, right? So it can be, oh, though this is how it's going to benefit the credit union, but also like, how is it benefiting our membership? How is it really going to make a difference for our team? And then how does it make a difference for me personally, right? So it could be some of those bigger things. When we're talking about development for us personally, everybody's motivated in different ways. Some people are really motivated towards more pay. Some people are motivated towards wanting to grow within the credit union, right? And kind of like move up the ladder. Some people are just focused on learning. They just really want to be challenged. They're not really necessarily, focused on that, right? Yeah. It's like, okay, cool. I just, I love what I'm doing, and I just want to, keep learning, stay challenged in where I'm going. So knowing those motivations and those factors can make such a big difference in whatever you're looking to kind of deploy, and making sure that there's some good questions being asked is really helpful. So that's the step one. Step two is tracking it. I find for a lot of organizations, again, kind of going back to the financial conversations, let's say a credit union is looking to grow. I always go back to, okay, perfect. Let's talk about the types and the number of financial conversations, like really good ones that are happening on the teller line and in the contact center and with members every day. Are we tracking that and really knowing what that looks like? That can be as simple as, hey, we got a little white, board that we use and kind of track on it. And do it that way. I've seen, more robust systems. I've got different things that I have on my side to help with that, and, different trackers and different things. But if things aren't tracked, they don't, it's almost kind of like they don't exist, right?
Yeah.
And, for the people who really need help and accountability, a tracker's helpful, but also to celebrate, and that kind of is the next piece. Like your highest performers want to know where they're at. I kind of think about, for me growing up, I played soccer. I'm not an athlete, but, I was like, oh, mom, I want to play soccer. It's World Cup right now, right? It's a big deal.
Yes.
And so I want to play soccer, and I was 5 years old. And at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, but at that time, they were like, hey, these guys are younger. We don't really want to keep score, because we don't want anybody to feel bad, that type of thing. And I remember thinking, like, this is so dumb. I know that we've already scored 5 goals. Like, these guys scored 2 goals. So it's like, I can do math. I wanted to know what the scoreboard was, right? Like, did I win? Did I lose? Did we do good? Did we do bad? And I think team members are the same way, where we just want to know what the score is. And once we know that, then we can kind of say, okay, perfect. Like I need some improvement, or, like what are we kind of building on here? So that's really, I think, key, is having something that's visible, that's tracking. Again, that's not oh man, we're this really over the top sales culture, or gosh, we're shoving things down people's throats. I mean, that's not going to go well most of the time, right? But it is really important to track those successes, and that can be in lots of different areas all across the credit union. And kind of having scorecards for each piece. And then the last one is celebrate. I have never met anybody who said, Michael, the reason I left the credit union is because we celebrated too much, and it was just kind of over the top, and they just valued me way too much and my contributions. It was kind of ridiculous, right? Like
I hated it. It was the worst.
It was so, yeah. And I'm not saying like you have to do pizza parties every single day or whatever, but when it's tied to the first two of like deeper motivations, what the credit union's doing, you're tracking it, and then you hit the goal. Whatever that might be. It could be something smaller, could be something bigger. That's a really big deal. And so making sure if it's just for you individually, hey, am I touching on all 3? Hey, I worked really hard on this project, and then I went and I grabbed a coffee, or I grabbed a coffee with a team, and we got to celebrate. We got to talk about all the cool things that happened. Or hey, we celebrated by sharing one thing that we loved about what another team member did that last week or during this project, or whatever it might be. That's the part that sometimes gets missed, because it's like, okay, cool, on to the next thing. We're moving really fast. We're growing our organization. Like that can just be part of it too. So those 3 in that combination can make a big difference.
I mean, you give people a competition. At least where I work, you give us a competition, we will figure it out. Especially if there's team competitions with us. Mm-hmm. There is a Teams chat so fast if there is a team competition at Harbor.
Yeah,
like, well, let's do this. Let's get it. So I do like it. Any other pieces of advice or information for those listening? Since we're nearing the end of our time, other than, get the book Catalyst and read it, because it's a really good book.
Well, yeah. 2 things. I'll kind of touch on that piece. So yeah, the first one is just, thank you for what you're doing. If you're listening to this podcast, you're in the credit union movement, obviously, and making an impact. And as I shared at the very beginning, that's really a big deal to me. So I just want to say thank you for doing that. And yeah, if you're in a leadership role, you're an emerging leader, this is something that, you're just loving what you're doing in your spot. It doesn't really, matter. Like I said, I think everybody's a leader. So I know I've heard from so many different people that they've taken something away from that book Catalyst that we wrote. And so something fun I wanted to do, Camille, is if anybody's listening to this podcast and wants to snag a copy, they can just go straight to my website. It's michaelwolsten.com. And there's a little contact me portion. Just say, hey, I heard you on the podcast, and can you send me a book? And I will ship you a book for free, because that's just my gift to you guys. So yeah, I'd love to do that.
I will definitely include the link in the description for the podcast in my post and let them know. That's great. Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Just my gift to you guys. Yeah, you got it.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for joining us and talking. And it's been great connecting with you and kind of getting to know you over the past couple of months.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking time and for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.